Rigdonite is a name given to members of the Latter-day Saint movement who accept Sidney Rigdon as the successor in the church presidency to movement. Founder, Joseph Smith. The early history of the Rigdonite movement is shared with the history of the Latter-day Saint movement, but as of the 1844 succession crisis becomes distinct. Sidney Rigdon and other church leaders, including Brigham Young and James J.Strang, presented themselves as leaders of the movement and established rival church organizations. Rigdon's group was initially headquartered in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It was known at one point as the Church of Jesus Christ of the Children of Zion, and its adherents are referred to as Rigdonites, or sometimes Pennsylvania Latter-day Saints, or Pennsylvania Mormons. The only surviving organization that traces its succession back to Rigdon's organization is the Church of Jesus Christ, founded by a group of Rigdon's followers led by William Bickerton. History. Sidney Rigdon, who had been the first counselor in the first presidency under Joseph Smith, claimed to have received a vision after the death of Joseph Smith, sustaining him as the leader of the church. Although Joseph Smith taught that after the president in a presidency is released or dies, the presidency no longer exists, Rigdon overlooked this teaching and returned to attempt to convince the other saints that he was to be the leader of the church. Unconvinced, because the other members were familiar with Smith's teachings, Brigham Young presented the doctrine taught by Smith that aside from the first presidency, the quorum of the 12 apostles was the governing body of the church. Most Latter-day Saints followed Young as a result. After the death of Joseph Smith in 1844, the history of the Rigdonites becomes independent from the other Latter-day Saint organizations. There was a large amount of confusion about who should succeed the fallen prophet. After Smith's death, Sidney Rigdon claimed the right to lead the church as the senior surviving member of the church's highest ruling body. The first presidency, the quorum of 12 apostles, led by Brigham Young, also claimed the right to lead the church. The quorum of the 12's claim was derived from a revelation of Joseph Smith allowing them to stand equal to the first presidency in attending to natural matters of the church. Prior to the death of Joseph Smith, the first presidency had made nearly all the major decisions and led the Church of Christ both naturally and spiritually. On June 1, 1841, Sidney Rigdon had been ordained by Joseph Smith as a prophet, seer and revelator, which was one of the same ecclesiastical titles held by Smith. The Church of Jesus Christ maintains that as first counselor to Smith, Rigdon should naturally have been the leader of the church after Smith's death. With this understanding, the Church of Jesus Christ actively opposes the opinion that the quorum of 12 had the right to lead the church. The Church of Jesus Christ argues that Rigdon should have been allowed to be what he claimed to be a guardian over the church until proper proceedings could decide the next president, and that proceedings which resulted in Brigham Young leading the church constituted a procedural violation. On December 27, 1847, when Young organized a new first presidency, the quorum of the 12 only had 7 of its 12 members present to represent a council to decide the presidency. William Smith, John E. Page, and Lyman White had previously denounced the proceedings and were not present. John Taylor and Parley P. Pratt were in the Salt Lake Valley and could not have known of the proceedings. This left just 7 present, a majority of 1, meaning Young would have to vote for himself in order to gain a majority quorum vote in favor of his leadership. Young chose 2 of the other apostles, Heber C. Kimball and Willard Richards, as his counselors in the first presidency. This left only 4 members of the quorum of the 12 present. present to vote in favor of creation of the new First Presidency. Orson Hyde, Wilford Woodruff, George A. Smith, and Orson Pratt. The Church of Jesus Christ views this action as a violation of church law compromising the authority of Sidney Rigdon without a majority quorum vote. The LDS Church actively opposes this view of the proceedings. Undaunted, Rigdon relocated to Pittsburgh and established a rival organization of the church. Ebenezer Robinson, founding publisher of the Times and Seasons, became publisher of a new church periodical, the Latter-day Saints Messenger and Advocate. The Rigdonite paper, like the reformist Mormon paper before it, the Nauvoo Expositor, sought to expose and condemned the practice of plural marriage. Church elder Benjamin Winchester commented that Young and the Quorum of the 12 had excited a certain portion of the church to reject Elder Rigdon from a fear that he would bring them to justice for teaching and practicing the doctrine of polygamy. The Rigdonites came to believe that Joseph Smith had become a fallen prophet when he began to practice polygamy, and that, as a result, the Lord smote him for this thing, cut him off from the earth. Quote, Rigdon toured the eastern branches of the church in late 1844 and early 1845, gathering leaders to his cause. He was joined by former members of the First Presidency, John C. Bennett and William Law, and also by former Apostle William E. McClellan. On April 6, 1845, 15 years after the original organization of the church, Rigdon presided over a general conference of Rigdonite Latter-day Saints in Pittsburgh, establishing a new hierarchy. He himself was sustained as president of the church. The new quorum of the 12 apostles consisted of William E. McClellan, George W. Robinson, Benjamin Winchester, James Blakesley, Josiah Ells, Hugh Herring Shaw, David L. Lathrop, Jeremiah Hatch, Jr., E. R. Swackhammer, William Small, Samuel Bennett. Carvel Rigdon became presiding patriarch, and a standing high council, quorum of the 70, presiding bishopric, and other quorum presidencies were established. In addition, Rigdon called 73 men and boys to a Grand Council, perhaps an adaptation of the Council of 50. Also at the conference, the new church organization formally returned its name to the 1830 church's original name, the Church of Christ. At a general conference held that fall in Philadelphia, Rigdon announced that the church would re-establish a communitarian society on what was named Adventure Farm, near Greencastle, Pennsylvania. Like many attempts to live the law of consecration in the Latter-day Saint movement, this experiment proved a failure. Rigdonite apostles William E. McClellan and Benjamin Winchester grew disgusted with Rigdon's leadership and found a new church president and organization in the person of David Whitmer and the Church of Christ. One of the replacements in the quorum was William Bickerton. Bickerton, however, disagreed with Rigdon's proposed move to Greencastle and severed his ties to the church. Bickerton remained in Monongahela, Pennsylvania, and never moved to Greencastle. By April 1847, the Adventure Farm community had collapsed and Rigdon had abandoned his flock, living out the rest of his life on the charity of relatives in New York State. Bickerton continued to live in the Monongahela area and in 1849 began meeting informally with other believers whom he had converted to the faith, few of which had ever been associated with Rigdon. In 1862, he formally organized his Pennsylvania followers into the Church of Jesus Christ. In January 1856, Stephen Post wrote to Rigdon about the disordered state of Mormonism. and in March Rigdon responded to Post's letter with a revelation commanding him to assist in re-establishing the Rigdonite organization. Post embraced Rigdon's prophetic claims and became an advocate of his cause, with an 1866 revelation designating him Rigdon's spokesman. Post's non-Mormon wife, Jane, converted to the Rigdonite Church in 1865 and was ordained an elder in 1868. In 1871, Post was sent on a mission to Manitoba, Canada, where he spent the rest of his life. After Rigdon's death, Post succeeded him as leader of the church, but died 3 years later. In 1880, Andrew J. Hinkle was appointed president of the church in his stead, but was replaced by Jane Post in 1882. After Jane Post's death, the remaining organization quickly collapsed.